All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Ring Magazine decides to take its time to defend Pauli Malignaggi from his ridiculously racist statements that he made. I'm just telling you, and it's a black dude doing it. Kills me every time, dude. Let's talk about what Dougie Fisher, the editor of Ring Magazine, had to say about Pauli Malignaggi. It just doesn't stop, dude. Let's do that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Pauli Malignaggi of Showtime Sports got fired. And he got fired on his day off. Not for stealing boxes like Smokey, but for no good reason whatsoever, popping off at the mouth and insulting an entire demographic of people in the United States by calling them liars, essentially, and acting as if all of their suffering is nitpicking and manipulation. Let's talk about Pauli Malignaggi and why in the world Ring Magazine would even half-heartedly try to defend the guy. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Pauli Malignaggi gets canned by Showtime like he should have, and many of the boxing media members responded to it in a way that was pretty predictable. They said they expected it, but yet none of them, with the exception of Ring Magazine and Dougie Fisher, I'm gonna light Dougie Fisher up now. However, I'm gonna give him for sure his credit for being the one guy that I saw that actually addressed the main issue first. Now, I believe that the reason that he addressed the main issue is because, being a black dude, he can see this issue because this issue is essential to him. Now, if you're not familiar with who Dougie Fisher is, he's the editor of Ring Magazine. He's been around covering boxing as a journalist for a long time now. Definitely one of the senior guys on that boxing beat, right? Used to be with a channel named Max Boxing. Then he went to Ring Magazine, became the editor of Ring Magazine. There might have been a temporary stop in between, but a guy that is a very good writer. Very good writer. I love reading. I love the way that he writes. I don't necessarily like what he says a lot of the time, but I can definitely appreciate the guy's skill set. So he has this article that comes out that he does back from the Max Boxing days that he took with him to Ring Magazine, and that's called Dougie's Monday. What is it? Dougie's Monday Mailbag, and it is a feature where I got to make sure I don't hit this volume, man, because I bumped this a couple times. I had to do my whole video over again. Really upset me. But he does this thing called Monday Mailbag with Dougie Fisher. And so this week, he was asked about Pauli Malignaggi being fired. Now, in the article, and I've got to give you the tone of the question, because that would be in Dougie Fisher's mind when Dougie Fisher is responding to the question. Now, the guy says, Dougie, I know you guys keep it boxing. You guys don't typically get into all this social, racial stuff with Ring Magazine. You guys keep it boxing and how outstanding it is that you keep it boxing. But what do you think about what took place with Pauli Malignaggi? Long story short, Dougie Fisher starts strong. Ends up making excuses for Pauli Malignaggi. And let me tell you how he did it. Credit to him first part, though. Credit to Ring Magazine for this part. They were the only ones that actually said what the issue was and why Pauli Malignaggi deserved to get fired. Pauli Malignaggi said two things in his this is the premise. Let me give you the premise of the nutshell of what Pauli Malignaggi said in his interview. He said he was asked about Devin Haney, saying Devin Haney, said that he'd never lose to a white boy. It was a setup question for Pauli because he was supposed to just say, hey, yeah, that's racist for him to say that white people can never beat a black fighter, that's racist. You're making prejudices based on somebody's color. That's wrong. So that should have been an easy shot to take at Devin Haney, right? Easy shot. But the interviewer made a mistake and didn't realize that he had a real American racist that he was interviewing. So that's not the angle that Pauli Malignaggi took. Pauli Malignaggi talked about whether or not it was true that black fighters were dominating white fighters. And this is how he broke off his answer. And I'm not going to give you word by word. I'm going to give it to you as I keep looking that way because if I bump this and this thing stops recording, I'm going to be hot. But this was his answer. Black fighters white fighters dominate boxing. White fighters dominated boxing from the beginning of boxing to around 1970. And then black fighters dominated from the 70s, 80s into the mid 90s. And now white fighters are dominating again. And white fighters are going to dominate for the next 25 years. And racism is made up. It's the figment of the imagination. It is an exaggeration and nitpicking on the part of black people. There is no racial oppression in the year 2020. Now, did Devin Haney bring up racial oppression? No. Devin Haney just said he wasn't going to lose to a white boy. Pauli Malignaggi is so wrapped up in it that he couldn't help but bring in all black people and call us all a bunch of excuse makers who are nitpicking society and making up lies about how we're oppressed. That's what Pauli Malignaggi said. And in the midst of saying it, he referred to black people and white people as different species and said that the day of the black fighter is over. Didn't Devin Haney get the memo? Now, how does Ring Magazine respond to that? Rightfully so, the editor of Ring Magazine, I should say. How does he respond? First part, he says, yeah, Pauli Malignaggi is pissed off a lot of people because he referred to black people as a different species. He said that the day of the black fighter, that racial oppression doesn't exist. So what did he say? He said that is going to trigger a lot of people. That is going to trigger a lot of people. But I am not so thick-skinned. And sensitive. Dougie, you do not have to be thick-skinned. You don't have to be thin-skinned or sensitive to acknowledge the murder of black people. For that to bother you, you don't have to be thin-skinned if you're living in a society where you really feel like your son can be killed at any time by people legally or illegally. That you don't have to be thin-skinned to be affected by that. But Dougie says he's not thin-skinned, but he does point out that was the major issue. But then Dougie moves on and starts talking about the second half of it, which is the supporting what Pauli Malignaggi said, which is that black fighters are no longer dominant. And then Dougie Fisher uses about the stupidest fucking example that he could have used. One of the names that he used, because he says back in the day, it used to be a lot more black. You used to have fighters like Freddie Pendleton. And so he uses this tactic of naming a bunch of black fighters from the 1980s and the 1990s and how he knew who they were during that time frame. Freddie Pendleton had like a record of 26-24. Freddie Pendleton was around, but Freddie Pendleton was just a journeyman. He wasn't some world-class fighter. You trying to tell me, Dougie, that there's not black journeymen? And how exactly does the fact that there were more black journeymen that you could mention, if that's even the case, than there are now? Robert Easter, why? There's not Freddie Pendleton isn't around, but Robert Easter Jr. is. Plenty of them. But what has changed in boxing since that time? Well, black fighters can't get shots at titles if the promoter doesn't sign them to their team, and if the promoter doesn't work to get them a title shot. And that most of the people that are getting title shots now and getting rankings now are getting rankings and title shots based on the degree to which their promoter backs them, not to the degree to which their communities are interested in the sport of boxing. Vasily Lomachenko got a shot at a world title in his second fight. Ray Beltran has had at least 4 shots at a title shot at 135 pounds, and he lost at least 3 of them. He lost at 135. Listen to how many shots Ray Beltran got at 135 out of Top Rank. He got a shot against Ricky Burns, lost. He got another shot against Terrence Crawford, lost. Then he got another shot. I think he got another shot. I can't remember. He lost again. And then he got a shot and he won it. But then he fought again. Then he fought Richard Comey and lost it. I know at least 4. I think Ray Beltran is like 1-4 in championship fights. Why does he keep getting shots at a title? Because the promoter wants him to have the shots at the title. Why does Vasily Lomachenko get a shot at the WBO 126-pound title in the second fight? Because Bob Arum wants him to have the title shot. Why did the IBF, for example, why did the IBF Liam Smith get a shot at the WBO title at 154 pounds and Austin Trout didn't? Because Frank Warren bribed the IBF, and the IBF dropped Austin Trout from the rankings and put Liam Smith up there so that Liam Smith could get the title shot, and Liam Smith went on to fight Canelo Alvarez. Is that a black boxer in Austin Trout not being dominant? Or is that a promoter in Frank Warren paying off the WBO so that their fighter can get the title shot? I think it's the second option. So, and then Dougie Fisher points to Ring Magazine itself as example of why black fighters are not as dominant as they used to be. Say, look at our top 10 pound for pound. We only have Tank Davis. We only have Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Crawford in there. But look at all the Eastern Europeans we have. We have Gennady Golovkin. We have Berturbiev. We have Vasily Lomachenko. And who else did he mention? And Usyk. Dude, that's who you're voting for. Why is Gennady Golovkin in a pound-for-pound list over Jermell Charlo? Canelo Alvarez's best win is against Daniel Jacobs, but that's your opinion about who's the best. That's not some actually knowing who the best fighter is. You got Canelo Alvarez on that pound-for-pound list. Canelo Alvarez tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs and ducked Jermall Charlo. And the reason he doesn't have to fight Jermall Charlo is because the WBC concocted something for him to be able to avoid him. And the network, DAZN, refused to get the fight for Demetrius Andrade for Jermall Charlo. Does Ring Magazine take those type of things in consideration when they talk about the domination of European fighters? If Pauli Malignaggi, if it continues, if the promoters, the networks, and the manager and the magazines all decide to only get behind European fighters, then yeah, the trend of having people think that they're more dominant can continue for 20 years. But that doesn't mean that the actual results are going to be that way, because right now there's more there are more Black American world champions than there are Eastern European champions. There's like 3 times as many, 4 times as many, because there's only 2. Usyk is not a champion. Usyk is not a champion. Gennady Golovkin took an L. And by the way, Gennady Golovkin is from Kazakhstan, which is Asian. So you're giving credit to an Asian fighter to be an Eastern European because he's got the name Golovkin, when he himself doesn't think of himself as that. The dude is Korean, and this dude's like Korean and Russian. But regardless, he lost to Canelo Alvarez, and his best win is against Daniel Jacobs. Who is he beating? And how could you keep Gervonta Davis off the list for Monster Inoue, and you keep Gary Russell Jr. off the list for Estrada? That's who you guys are wanting to promote and who you want to push. And I remember Dougie Fisher when he was talking about like all these good old days when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a top fighter, and dude, he was never pushing those guys. He was picking Diego Corrales over Floyd Mayweather Jr. and making a bunch of excuses for when Floyd Mayweather Jr. whooped Diego Corrales. Man, these cats are ridiculous, man. I'm glad we got the LDBC, and I'm glad we got Black American fight channels that will actually talk about black fighters and give them their credit instead of doing what with Ring Magazine, who's bought and paid for by Golden Boy, and Top Rank or ESPN, who literally pays the check of Top Rank, has to say about it. But anyway, that's my take on it. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.